Welcome to the third Bridge Book Club meeting. Today we'll be discussing 4 sections and 51 chapters on the topics of scholarity, interconscientiality, intellectuality, and criticality. Okay, this meeting will be facilitated by Dave. Dave, if you could just wave your hand, and myself, Michiko. The structure of this meeting is meant to be an open discussion of any of these chapters in no particular order. Please feel free to speak up at any time, ask questions, or provide your comments or share your experiences. And if you prefer, you can write your question using the chat feature of this Zoom meeting, okay? You are automatically on mute when you enter, so don't forget to unmute yourself and then mute yourself again when you are not speaking. We would also like to remind everyone that this meeting will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel for anyone who wants to participate but are unable to attend the meetings. Okay, so anybody have any questions about how the meeting will go or anything else? If not, we'll get started.
Hey everybody, I just thought I'd maybe just kick things off and we can go from there. So I think maybe a good way to start is if anybody has either read all of the chapters or maybe even read some of the chapters in this section, just if they have any overall impression about the chapters that they read or the section that they read, and anything they'd just like to comment on, maybe to start things off.
I just finished to read it today. It was a little bit in a rush this month, but I could read all the chapters. So.
Unfortunately, I couldn't read all. I read 2 of them, but so let's see how it goes. Sorry.
Yeah, there was a lot of chapters, right? Yeah. And Regina, I think you had your hand up too. You're on mute, Regina. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, okay. Good morning, all. Yeah. Okay, I could read all the chapters. I took some notes, but okay, let's see. Let's see what's going on.
You guys have been very general in your initial overviews. Were there any specific, just like a sense about what the author's intent was, or some of the the ideas that were coming to you, that the orientations coming from what you read, no matter how much? You're all being very shy. Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say something just to kick off, and then let's see, but I think it's just very interesting that, at least in these particular sections, there's just such an emphasis on being mental somatic and taking a really serious approach to your scholarship or your attempt to understand information coming from books and other resources, and coupled with that, a deep awareness and connection with multidimensionality, and also just living well, like being a decent person that's well integrated into life and handles things in a good way. I mean, all those themes just keep getting kind of hammered, in the various sections. So I think it's a very interesting, almost like a practical manual for how to live a good life, in some ways, is how I saw this section of chapters. Does anyone have any thoughts about that?
I agree with you, Dave. I thought that these chapters were very practical and offered a lot of technique and tests to qualify and to kind of analyze where you stand, I guess, in a lot of these regards with scholarity and intellectuality and self-criticalness, for example. And I thought that the way that the author provided tests and techniques, it really puts you in that practical aspect to really think about evidence from your experiences, and not just, you know, reading theory. I thought it was a good exercise in really thinking about that part of it.
Yeah, I agree with Michiko, and I think that it gives us the guidelines for and some instructions for us to act better in all ways, especially mental somatically. So it's very interesting, very nice. I took notes of some parts as well that I considered important for me. First of all, interconsciential work, and of course to be better, right, in my relationships with people around. That's it.
Yeah, I think they're really, really good points, you know, and it's interesting, you know, you realize that the weight of, you know, the author's experience that's coming through, you know, with both of those approaches, you know, many decades of living in a particular way and trying to sort of pass that on, you know, how much of a commitment we would need to make to those types of renovations and habits, right? To then, you know, have the outcomes that we want, you know, in terms of the evolution, like who we actually are as a consciousness, right? Good. Any specific questions or chapters that maybe were particularly interesting, or that you'd maybe like to discuss more, or that you had some questions or doubts about?
I just want to share my experience, because there is a chapter, I cannot find it right now, but it's a chapter that he talk about that a reader can read 300 words per minute, no? And it's more or less that a page of 700. And I start to, I don't know, I think this intellectuality part makes me feel more connected and concentrate to read. And so I start to measure my reading in these chapters and my concentration, and I used this technique, and was so good. So I think there was a helper there also, no, to stimulate this kind of reading, more concentrate and more focus, and the intellectuality. I think was good.
Yeah, there was one section, right, where I think he talked about that. I'm looking for it now too. Yeah, actually, maybe it was a different one. I'm thinking about one where he talked about enumerations, and he had sort of almost a way of quantifying the density of language, you know, per word or something, or the density of knowledge. He had a ratio, and I don't know if I fully agree with what he was proposing, but it's interesting anyway in terms of being just so deeply focused on text. It's really, and I think especially now when so many of us have smartphones, you know, and there's so much information that's available to us passively by video, you know, on social media and things, and it can make us much more superficially engaged with information, right? Just kind of forming impressions rather than kind of having to work our mental muscle to understand something a bit more complex, right? And really go more deeply, and that's what ultimately is more likely to produce, you know, insights for us if we you know, challenge ourselves in that more active way, right?
For me, reading this book again, and yeah, and it's another moment. But I think the first time that I read this book was 2003, so many time ago, and it's working for me as a stimulation, a motivation to produce lucid projections again. Because I remember at the first time when I have begun to study Conscientiology, I had a year or 2 years that I had really a lot of lucid projections. And then It was a time that I couldn't remember so much, but nowadays I am interested again in improve this kind of situation, and reading this book is bringing me again this kind of motivation, and to take notes again. Sometimes I had some experiences, some lucid projections, and I didn't wrote, and I started again to wrote, to pay more attention, to trying to be more lucid, trying to remember when I wake up this kind of experiences. Né? And reading this book it's bringing me this motivation again to improve, to develop more lucid projections. And yesterday, Marina Tomás presented, how I say, a verbete in Tertulia, and she called the attention about this again. Nah? That's very important for us. And sometimes we are in our intraphysical life, and we are not more paying so much attention on this phenomena, on this situation that connect ourselves with the multidimensionality. Né? That's very important. I think we need to pay attention to this.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like in the early stages, it's a really, it's an important thing to help us to get the orientation and to validate, the validity, right, of some of the ideas and theories. But then we just, it's just projections, right? And also we may be busy in our professional life, and we want to get a good night's sleep, so we don't want to wake up at 3 in the morning and write notes, so we don't take as much value, right? But it is, at a certain point, there's just so much value and opportunity that we have by having these experiences, right? So yeah, I agree with you. It's some of those chapters when you're reading about, the seriousness with which he was, taking notes, and it's just a lot of work to really write the details. It takes, like an hour sometimes, and Sorry, you were saying something?
Yeah, no, because when you hear Professor Waldo, or when we read something about our evolution, for example, to buy a OFX, he told that it's not very necessary to have lucid projections, to have this trait, developed trait to achieve this. Huh? So that's good.
Who else? Tony, we'd like to hear from you today. Tell us something. What were your thoughts so far about what you've read in this section, or just more generally being part of the experiment? You're on mute.
Hello, are you listening? Okay. Every time I have a look in the 700 Experiments, I get impressed on how Professor Waldo is able to express complex and deep ideas with short words. So it's amazing his ability to synthesize, to express these complex thoughts with short sentences. So I think it's amazing. And when we read in English, I think the whole team that did this translation job, it was an amazing job, because I think you were reading like the original. So I would like to congratulate Jeff and all the team to this work. So it's amazing how we can connect with the Olotov theme of the book by reading in another language. I remember I had the opportunity to get in contact with the 700 Experience in 1994, just before the publication, because Professor Waldo shared some copies of the book before the official publication, and it was another level of debate and information in the conscientiology environment. So we also accessed the projectiology at that moment. And I had the same feeling, the same idea when I was reading these chapters again in English. So yeah, I feel very connected with this style and with the way he expressed this idea. I feel very comfortable in reading these ideas, like an intermissive connection, I think so. Yeah, I would like to flag one chapter that I will discuss or have more suggestions from you guys. Let me have a look at the number. I think it's 65, Test of the Science of Reconciliation. I've write down a question on the forum a few hours ago, and I would like to ask you if you have any practical suggestion on how we can reconciliate with groups of people and specific individuals by using techniques, practical approach. So that's my challenge, because I've been working with a lot of different young people here in Australia, and one of the most challenging situations is how to create reconciliation opportunities for them with these families, with the people they are connected with. So yes, I would like to understand more a little bit about the reconciliation techniques. I don't know if you guys have any suggestion or could help me with that.
I had the same question, so I'm so glad that you asked that question, because chapter 65 was the one that really stood out for me as well. And I've got so many questions around that chapter, but it occurs to me, if we've had contact with millions of people through millions of lifetimes, you know, like many lifetimes, and I just know from my personal experience of life that there are many people that I don't get along well with. How can we reconcile that without actually contacting them physically? Because some people, it's impossible to contact them physically anymore, in terms of they're not dead, but they're on the other side of the world. We've lost their contact details, you know, all of that kind of thing. So, yeah, thank you.
Just to put the synchronicity, as Tony Kristen talked about this chapter, and I also had something with this chapter when I was reading, and I was thinking why it was in the intellectuality. You know, why in the intellectuality, Professor Waldo talk a lot about relationship and communication, you know, relationship in the intellectuality. And I had some ideas, but also I thought about the reconciliation with people. And I just came to me about energies, you know, sometimes how is difficult the approach with some people. That was my thought about the people, you know, I might have to reconciliate. And I thought about the approach of energetically, intoxically, you know, not think better from the person and send energies, and was about that.
There's a challenge in it, isn't there, about forgiveness, right? And And reconciliation, I reckon it's really interesting because look here in Australia what they did some years ago when the Prime Minister of the day asked for forgiveness basically from the Aboriginal people. And what did he do? He apologized for what was done. So there's for me, it was a great example. It was a really lovely day to be here, but to see recognition of what was done wrong. And so sometimes I think that means we need to reinterpret the past in a way which helps us to be liberated from it, as opposed to be a prisoner of it. You know, many times we keep that kind of comfortable position of self-victimization or being a victim of the thing, because many times we're getting secondary gains from it. And so we have to sort of help people to understand that they remain a prisoner and it's sort of their choice. And that, I suppose, a big part of that in my mind, at least, Tony, and I'm sure there's many other ideas that you could probably share with us as well, and others. But a big part of obviously that movement comes with the thing of forgiveness.
The chapter, Magali, is in the topic interconscientiality. Ne? Yeah, okay. But it's interesting to relate them to communicability. Eh? So this is about communicability.
But the chapter, sorry, Regina, the chapter is wrong there. It's not interconscientiality. I see that is written interconscientiality, but if you see before 7.4 is intellectuality and 6 and 6 is intellectuality. I think that chapter, I don't know, we have to check, Jeffrey's checking, but I think it's intellectuality. Would be more, I think is...
No, it should be interconscientiality according to...
yeah.
I think it's the last chapter in the interconscientiality section. I'm not sure about that. But
Okay.
Yeah, it appears to be the last chapter.
So is the other one that is wrong. Is the 7.4 that is wrong. Okay? Because I thought one was wrong, but wasn't that one. So good. Thank you, Regina.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, yeah, it's interesting that so many of you like this chapter, because I really like this chapter too. And it is unusual in its placement a little bit, but I think it is the part I felt about the whole section is that it's almost like a guide for living well, you know, almost like just a principles or philosophies for a good life, you know, sort of put into the whole mix. Yes, I think it's really positive, even the idea about, you know, teaching kids reconciliation in high school. You know, what a fantastic idea. Yeah, and I think Jeff's point's a good one about forgiveness. You know, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Malu Bologna's, you know, book on forgiveness, and the whole idea about, you know, you don't need both people to be present to forgive, right? You know, so long as you within yourself, you know, make some serious attempt to genuinely forgive the person for any wrong that you felt was done, you know, and send a lot of energies to the situation and the person, you can really improve your relationship with that person, you know, without actually having any kind of a conversation with them, if that's not possible. So there's certainly, you know, a lot of our attitudes around forgiveness and reconciliation, that they're inward postures, you know, mental postures, as opposed to things that have to necessarily involve others, you know, and that's in my experience too. I think there's another point, I think it's in another chapter, where he talks about having rose-colored glasses or something when we see other people. And, you know, I think that sometimes that can be a difficulty or a problem if we're too naive with some people. You know, we need to have our eyes open. But I personally am a great believer of erring on the side of being, you know, seeing people more favorably. And, you know, life is just easier that way, I think. You know, people can wrong you sometimes, but you get over it quite quickly. You know, just be more forward-looking rather than living in the past. You know, it makes for a more enjoyable like ecosystem inside yourself. You know, so I think that this is a really, really important chapter and a good one. And just one other thing I wanted to comment on. It's really interesting that example you gave, Jeff, about, you know, Kevin Rudd. Because one thing, you know, how the United States, you know, where I live now, it's a very inward-looking society, and the news media and everything. But that incident of forgiving or apologizing on behalf of the, you know, the colonizers, that made the headlines of the New York Times that day. You know, which just doesn't ever happen really. So it's like, wow, this, you know, really, it's a big deal, you know, all those tens of thousands of years of people living there, and, you know, the way they were treated, right? So yeah, it was pretty good.
Jeff, I just had a question. So chapter 65, number 8, population. It says, it's always a self-corruption or anti-cosmoethical to appeal to the increase in the terrestrial demographic index as an excuse. And my question is, as an excuse for what?
Yeah, please go ahead, Michiko, please.
No, just wanted to say that my personal interpretation of that is that because of the huge population growth and that there are so many people, the chances of being able to reconcile is a bit more difficult. As you pointed out, Kristen, that it's often the case where you'll meet someone once and then it's very difficult to contact them again in the same life. So to use the increase in the population as an excuse to not have to do reconciliation, that's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think that's probably correct. But also there's often other ways of interpreting the things as well. Like that's one thing I love about the way the author writes. And you can go elaborating your own ideas. If it makes sense to you, that's great. So for example, here another one is sometimes because the population is so big now that some people feel kind of like they can, like in the past, going back to the past when there's little small tribes and little small groups, people probably tended to be better to each other, with at least within that tribe or in that small group, that village or whatever. Obviously not always, but in general perhaps. But now with there's just so many people and so much stuff and movement and changes and so on, I think people might feel a sense of like whatever, it doesn't matter, or everyone's doing it, or, you know, a lack of empathy, which I think Flavia mentioned in one of the questions. People have a lack of empathy in relation to each other, and part of that is because there's just overwhelming number of people everywhere. And so yeah, but it will be tying back into the theme of reconciliation, you know. So using there's so many people, so much stuff, as an excuse to not engage in your own personal process of reconciliation wherever they're necessary. I think that's what he's probably driving at, as Michiko was saying.
Okay, thank you guys.
Hi, I'd like to add a comment to the 11th item about this personal affective dictionary. I have been in some experience with dealing with this climate change discussion around the health of people, and there is everywhere we have this idea that is us against them. And then I think that this chapter here brings the idea that this is an idea that we have to overcome in terms of reconciliation. This simple idea that we have in our mind, in our dictionary, mind dictionary, that we have this concept of enemy or us against them. This is something that has to be overcome. That is, I think, is very, very important.
but I think too, it's important before I am thinking about reconciliation, to analyze what kind of feelings do I have with the other person, for example. If I have sorrow, anger, I don't know why, no? What. But before thinking about reconciliation, I think it's important to understand better what I feel, how I am feeling this, what happened, what kind of traits, strong traits, weak traits do I have to deal with the situation or to promote a reconciliation with other people. So I think it needs to start with ourselves, analyzing ourselves. Have you heard me? Because I can't see the videos.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Like you were reminding me of the idea, you know, like talking about empathy and examining yourself. Like if you're still angry about the thing and you're still blaming the other person and you're still thinking and producing thought scenes that are negative about the other person, clearly you're still a prisoner to that situation, and you haven't done enough reflection. Because I think when you get to the point where you can actually feel warmth and affection for the person again, and even well, when you say empathy and like even care, and you're starting to understand them from their point of view. Many times when people attack you, they're asking for help, right? But many times we feel attacked and we just respond with defense and victimization and so on. But if we start to understand them, many times they're asking for help. Many times we can, and I don't mean that in a way to put the other person down, but just in a way to help us to change the approach we're taking to the particular situation.
Exactly that, Jeff. So Magali asked me to expose my idea on empathy. So this is, to my point of view, is extremely important, because you have to be out of yourself and see the other person's needs. And if you want to really a real reconciliation, to me, it's important to see the other person's, to see what happens to the other person, you know, inside. According to Marshall Rosenberg, so the book that he wrote about nonviolence communication. So it's important to have some, you know, ideas that before you approach the person. So you should really first understand what's happening to that person. But of course, for you to understand what's happening to the other person, you have to understand what's happening to you as a reflex on what the person is feeling, what it impacts me on my part, on my own feelings. This is the way, and I'm teaching here in Porto. I'm in Porto. I'm Brazilian, but I'm here in Porto, and I'm an English teacher here, and I have the chance now to teach 2 teams groups, you know, and I'm a volunteer for Evolucim in Foz, like online volunteer, right, for Evolucim. And of course, my focus is exactly to understand this mentality, now the mentality of Portuguese consciousness, Portuguese kids' consciousnesses. And it's, for me, it's a very important lesson for me to practice this empathic work that I've been involved in my studies. And so this perspective of trying to understand, you know, what the kid is thinking. So trying to see more deeply the consciousness that is in front of me, because we know that age is just a moment, of course, of consciential basement, I think, that is very much emphasized according to the studies of the Urbanizatus. And then, so this is extremely important to have all these concepts, and the moment that I am in front of that teen, to try to visualize, to have this cosmovision of who is exactly that consciousness that's in front of me. And this kind of work of trying to understand and at the same time trying to understand yourself can probably, it's my hypothesis of breaking up these connections, this, you know, these past implications of the consciousnesses involved. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, because this is so intraconsciential. But for me to say something to a team, when I perceive that, when I notice that as a student, but I try to understand what is the consciousness that is there in that moment, in that group, for me, it's a challenge. And at the same time, gives me the idea who I was as a teen as well. And if I see someone that is very introspective, for example, I can understand my introspection when I was a teen myself, and the way that I had to be through in order to overcome that introspection. And so this like visual idea of how to help that kid, you know, in order to be a better person, to live in groups and to have lots of other interactions, it's and even to reconcile inside the group, because we can see sometimes some stigma and some bias against each other, in my experience inside the room now in the classroom. So it gives me the possibility, you know, to understand better the consciential work that we have to deal with, and the responsibility that we have when we are involved with these minds, you know, this like temporarily teenage minds or kid minds. So sorry to, it's just exposing, you know, my work, you know, sorry.
Really interesting, Flavia. And I want to ask a question for you about, do you think that self-knowledge and empathy has a strong relation?
Of course. Of course, it's extremely important for you to know yourself, of course, because the moment that you create this openness of trying to understand how and what the other person is thinking and behaving, of course, that immediately it's important for self-knowledge to understand your biases, your interconsciential limits, your weak traits, and of course, trying to help you develop the strong traits and even the missing traits, right? Of course, it's a big field. It's a very large field that we have to go through. But my master's, it was here in Portugal. I've studied for 2 years online. And then in 2018, I came here to Lisbon to defend it. And my team is exactly this. It was empathy and inclusion based on my second children's book I wrote. It's O Menino que tinha o coração na cabeça. It's like the boy that has the heart in his head. And it's a book that was inspired by one of the consciexes, Portuguese consciexes. And then, okay, this is just a casual, my own personal experience now to write this book and to apply this book into a very poor, let's say very poor neighborhood in São Paulo that is called Guaianazes, that is for inclusion of children with deficiencies, you know, with physical disabilities. And then the teachers there, they have to work with these kids and try to interact these kids with the regular kids in elementary school. And this is so hard because there is a national curriculum that says, and base that says that you have to integrate these children together. And there is lots of prejudice on the part of teachers themselves, because the teachers, the ones that have to deal with the disabled children and the ones that have to deal with the regular teachers, the regular, like say the normal kids, they don't talk. They have problems between themselves. You see the reconciliation stuff. So this is amazing. So for us to think that you have lots of conflict between the teachers themselves, and imagine the conflict between the kids themselves, you know, to interact the kids with disabilities and the kids that are, between quotations, normal. So this is, and then I developed the work of this book to talk to the teachers and try to interact with the teachers and the children. But it was my experience, and I'm trying to see if here in Portugal, I can have access to other schools so that I can develop this work as well. Meanwhile, I am trying to develop this with lectures online by Evolucim. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Sorry.
I actually had a, sorry, you go, Max.
No, I was just saying that it has in the end empathy and forgiveness. They come together, no? Because when you have more, it's easier to forgive when you are more empathic, and you see the other side, and you can understand the situation that the person did that, and you know, that's.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that, and then just bring it back to what Roberto said, because I think, you know, Roberto's point's a really important one on like the global level, with so many of the problems that we're having right now with polarized groups in society. And I know that you're having lots of fun with Bolsonaro in Brazil, and we're having fun with Trump here in the US, and you know, everyone's got someone they're having fun with right now. You know, and it's a lot of times people don't feel that they can communicate with people because some of the views that they might have are different, you know, without recognizing that, not being comfortable with ambiguity, right? That, you know, a person, you can have a very good friendship with somebody, even though you just cannot understand how they could possibly think a particular thing, you know? So, and this is something that it's really tied in with these themes, you know, being able to be reconciled and have a peaceful and harmonious relationship with people, even though there's very big ideas that are different between you, you know, and it's, you know, I think it ties in a little with, you know, just having an inward posture of fraternity and empathy to the points being made here, you know, and yeah, lots of things, right? But I think this is something that's quite lacking right now, even a degree of maybe insecurity or a lack of confidence, you know, thinking that they're the victim of some other forces that they don't control. Whereas sometimes those forces are just a bunch of very average humans that are born into a particular situation, and maybe in the example of Roberto, you know, they live in like some place like Texas or somewhere where there's a lot of oil reserves, and next thing they're in an oil industry, and they don't mean to be a bad person. They're just sort of doing that thing that's around them, you know, rather than being this like demon that has to be fought. You know, and there are obviously people with bad intentions doing terrible things, but people are normally more complex than that. It's a real minority, right, that are really fully bad people in every aspect. You know, even someone like our friend Trump has some good qualities, actually.
I was wondering about the possibility of using the same techniques and same strategies that we can use in a micro conflict between two people, to a small family, for example, or a small group or a couple, to a large group or to a big conflict. So I think one hypothesis would be that these mechanisms and these techniques could be reproduced in a large scale to solve biggest conflicts like war conflicts or ethnical conflicts, for example. So we can try to develop some theories and some approaches in conscientiology, in the science of reconciliation. That's the main idea of this chapter, to bigger conflicts. Yeah, and I was remembering that two examples on these subjects. One was between the Jewish and Palestinian groups. I remember I saw one news about a group of women, actually mothers, Jewish mothers, marching together with Palestinian mothers as an effort to de-escalate the aggression and violence in the Israel conflict. So I think as a mother, you are not a target for the children. It means the guys who are fighting each other. So these mothers were trying to put themselves in front of this conflict, marching in different zones of conflicts, and try to share this message of peace. So I think it's an interesting idea, the symbolism and the idea of motherhood, and the image of the women in the middle of this chaos, this conflict. So it was one practical example. Another one was in South and North Korea. I remember a few years ago in the Winter Olympics Games, this scenario, the sport, the Winter Games, was an excuse to start a conversation between the North and South Korea. So I think it was one of the first steps to start this approach between these governments that we are in conflict, that were separated by the war. So it's another example, like the excuse of the game as a competition, but it's a positive competition. So I was thinking that what other strategies like that or situations we could use as an excuse or as a start point for a reconciliation effort in terms of big group or big conflicts, you know. I think there are a lot of extra physical work to get to this moment. But for example, Roberto rose the question about the environmental crisis. Is there any possibility of create a kind of scenario to approach, for example, the children there who are advocating through environmental issues and the companies who are destroying the environment? So what kind of scenario situation we could think in terms of create these opportunities of reconciliation to try to find agreement or a point to de-escalate this conflict or try to prevent this? I'm not sure if I clear with my points. It's just putting some ideas for discussion, and big ideas, not in terms just interpersonal relations, but I'm talking about global issues or global conflicts.
Yeah, that's interesting, Tony, because it's like when you're talking, I was thinking about conversion. No? What conversion people to the same thing that make them forget about things that is not so, that's not good enough, you know, that doesn't put people in the right track. And like now we have the climate change and like the fire that was in Australia going, the smoke doesn't stop because it's another country, it's Argentina, so it's not going there, it's going there. So I think that type of thing is creating conversion because people knows that we depend to each other, and in some way we could have this, you know, this conversion. Don't know if it's makes sense. Conversions.
I think I would like to say that that the idea of reconciliation, I think the paradigm, consciential paradigm, has a lot to contribute to these global issues. I think that we have a big picture. Remember that stages of group karmality: interpretation, victimization, recomposition, self-liberation, polykarmality. These 5 stages, I think we have this understanding that is what create, how can I say, empathy, self-compassion, compassion, and all the ingredients to promote this reconciliation that the world is needing. And I think it's time to us to speak out these ideas outside of our circles of studies of conscientiology. We need to publish papers and to give lectures to people in these polarizations in terms of climate change, political issues. It's very interesting when we can see this continuation of problems in one time, another time, in one country, another country. This is something very powerful. I think it's our time to start this, promote this idea. And this is studies about, to put these ideas in English, I think is the first step to this. This is idea of to promote the discussion about conscientiology in English, I think is the first step to this.
I agree with you, Roberto, and I was exactly thinking about when I read this chapter. When we, okay, we are in the beginning of this achieving this to spread the conscientiology knowledge, or a way of understanding the life. I think this is the most important thing, because for me, when I started to understand my life and the things that belongs to relation and bad things, good things, in this way, in this way, for me it was very different, a very different possibility to understand all the situations and to deal with them with the people that are involved and with the situation in a different way, because it's amplify our vision and our possibility of understanding. When we think that we had past lives together, and we are going to have lives in the future together, and to understand, as Tony started, the first question about reconciliation, when we think that we can't evolve ourselves, we can't achieve an evolution situation or condition if we didn't reconciliation. We don't do reconciliation. For me, it's the most important thing in our evolution way, in our evolution condition. So understanding in this, in the consciential paradigm is very important and different. A very nice opportunity.
I'd just like to add to that, also Roberto's comments about starting to talk and have these discussions in conscientiology in English. I think that is a very good starting point. And then eventually maybe look into more partnerships. I know that Ulysses does, probably a lot of people in conscientiology has workshops and meetings and conferences within their professions, their professional industries, and contact with other material scientists and researchers, materialist researchers. So I think it's a good way to start to have these discussions with the larger, I guess, arena, a larger audience. Also, another thing I was noticing is the videos. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with TED Talks, and how People have the opportunity to give lectures, and it has a wide reach to a lot of people all over the world. It's amazing how many people will watch these lectures, and they're interested in these topics, new ideas. People all over the world actually want to hear new ideas, new solutions. So, you know, that might be a strategy to start looking into more partnerships, and then with other researchers, other scientists, and also tapping into the technology that's available today.
Yes, and Roberto got the point. Like it's, I don't know, but this environment, to talk about environment, it's a way. I don't know if you agree or not. Because Roberto is working with this integration, you know, medicine and all these things, but I see the environment with a step where everyone is inside, and it's a way also to speak about reconciliation and all these things. I don't know what you guys think about that. And like Michiko was telling, you know, how to do a TED with all these that evoke reconciliation in a big vision of the world, you know, with the environment, with integration.
I'm just going to be devil's advocate for 2 seconds and say that I can't remember which chapter it's in, but they're talking about the idea that you can't, basically, you can't make somebody accept your ideas, yeah? And you can teach people, but if they're not willing to listen, if they're not at that evolutionary stage, it's going to just... And I look around me and I see the top rating shows in Australia, which are things like Married at First Sight and Love Island and Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And I think that the big problem in terms of war, in terms of the environment, in terms of the issues that are going on, is that the vibration on Earth is incredibly low and it needs to be raised. And unfortunately, the majority of people can't even begin to think in terms of vibration, you know? And for me, that's the big problem with global reconciliation and getting things done. That people can disagree.
You know, it's interesting, isn't it? Like, if we take that to a personal level, like if you talk about a global vibration, what is that made up of? I suppose you could say it's made up of the 7.5 billion individuals, and what level of vibration we're individually each able to produce. So if you bring that even more personally, what generates those vibrations? Is that your thoughts and your emotions that are reflected in your energy and the vibration? And then obviously, if so, then okay, what can you do to improve the quality of your thoughts and your emotions in relation to things? So what can you do to improve your emotions? Well, you got to start with the self-analysis and the self-research. There might be some mega cosmic things happening that will affect moods and tendencies and things on Earth. Okay, that's possible, but for things to be sustainable, it has to be natural for each of those 7.5 billion people to be living in a better way. So producing better thoughts, producing better thoughts and sentiments and emotions and energies, right? And so I think a lot of people want to do that. You might even say maybe even the majority and sometimes want to do that, or at least they want to do it, but they don't necessarily know they want to do it all the time. Like, they want to avoid suffering. They want to feel better. They want to enjoy and be happier. But many times, because of the pathological nature of society still, you know, and throughout all of history until now, in general, right, there's a lot of good stuff like we've been saying, but we've sort of been conditioned to suck it up and just live with a really substandard way of living. Like, lots of things are permissible and possible in our society that don't help individuals produce those better thoughts and produce those better emotions, even though, you know, they're legitimized, they're part of the society, and we're told that's okay. but they don't work very well. And so this whole reformation, this whole renewal, this whole reurbanization it's an interesting thing. So I waffled, but hopefully there's something in there someone can pick up on.
I think, Jeff, that there is this moment. There is a kind of evolutionary mismatch, and in the society, what we need for our health, for our well-being, is change our behavior, is change our energy, and they need this, but they don't. The solutions that our society has provided, it's not in this direction. There is a not long-term vision. They have short solutions. That solutions are creating more problems. And then this idea of happiness that society have with money, success, this is something that we in Conscientiology has a lot of other values and other perspectives. And I think when we start talking about this with more meaning, more purpose, I think we have good solutions to conflicts, but as someone said, that people need, that they have their level of evolution, of course. Then there is a kind of evolution of values in our society. And our job is to promote the better values to people migrate. There is a study about this, they call this dynamic of evolution of values. There is a study about this. And we are, with Conscientiology, promoting good values to people who have better lives. And I think it's time, as we are discussing here, to promote these ideas.
I just want to add to that. I think one thing, you know, I don't know how planetary it is, or if it's just more, you know, what I see, but, you know, certainly here in the US and, you know, in some of the English-speaking countries I interact with, there's been a massive shift, I think, in the last 10 years towards actually better values, you know, in the workplace and, you know, with millennials and so on. So I think there's still so much pathology. I'm not trying to say that, you know, things are great, but it's almost as though people are being more self-aware in terms of recognizing the values that they have and trying to adhere to them to have a better life and to value things other than money, and to take benefit, to enjoy being someone who helps in the workplace or just in life in general. So I kind of think that somehow the financial crisis and the way the world got rocked actually kind of helped a lot of people to, you know, rethink things and kind of get back to their roots a little bit. But there's no real framework. There's no sort of explanatory model behind that, you know, and that's certainly something that, you know, these ideas that we have about multidimensionality can offer. So, you know, I don't quite know how to marry that explanatory framework with this sort of like development of better ideas and better values rather, that seems to be starting to take hold to some extent. And just one final point I'll make on that, even though I was talking with Jeff a few weeks ago, you never used to hear people talk about energy in the workplace, at least not in the United States. But now it's very common to people say, oh, there was good energy in the meeting. Oh, that person has good energy. You know, it's like, yeah, great. This is fantastic, guys. You know, they don't know what energy is. You know, they don't know how to work with it, but they can recognize it and they're comfortable to talk about it. I mean, these kinds of things are really positive, I think. So, but yeah, I to your point, Roberto, that would be ideal if there was a chance, like an opening for some ideas put forward in a really good way, to give people an explanatory framework for these things. But yeah, I'll be quiet now.
And how do we provide that explanatory framework? You know, like books are one way, videos and discussions like this are kind of thing, but what's better ways of communicating that? Like I love the idea of, for example, infographics, and I did a course on Theory U, which manages to present a lot of information in graphical ways that are quite easy to absorb. And so, I mean, because we want to be effective in the communication of things, right? And not dominate the conversation, but just be inclusive and open and contribute where we can. And I don't know, what other thoughts do you guys have? I'm curious.
Yes, I was thinking about this Theory U, this approach, and that put people together. And I think we have a problem in Conscientiology because we tend to have a more authoritarian way of communication in Conscientiology. We are not so open to different point of view. And this is a kind of problem. We have it to, because we have so much certainty about our knowledge, our relative edge truth. I don't know, I don't remember our
leading edge relative truths.
Yes, yes, we are confident with this. Sometimes we become a little bit, how can I say, we think we are better than others, and this is not good to communicate.
I think it's not that we think they are better most of the time, but most of people don't really thought about their values or things like that. And then you spend a lot of time doing this, and then you have more arguments, you have more knowledge, and in the end, that seems like that you maybe not better, but you know more, so you have more fundamental ideas. I see like that. And also about the other thing that we're talking about, how to promote those ideas, I just want to say that I have a little slight different point of view about that. I think when you change a paradigm, there are phases, and we are like in an initial phase of it. So I don't have any expectation that people will understand us in a ground or in a big way, or they will have like a lot of people understand Conscientiology. Actually, I'm really interested in putting in practice the things about Conscientiology, the principles. That's my main objective in this life. And maybe do some, help people with my example, by exemplarism. And of course, I like to give speeches and do things, courses, and promote these ideas. I think it's important. But when just one person show up, I don't have, for a course or a lecture or something like that, I'm not disappointed. I don't have at all previous expectations about that, because I know it's hard, and I know it won't be, these ideas won't be accepted or understood at this point. So I'm more worried about solidifying this knowledge here now, contribute to that. So in the next life, I can pick up, my next life, I can pick up from where I am now, or even close. I don't have these, it's something that you should do. It's the clarification task, but I'm not worried. Like, it's not the central point of where I put my worth, actually. I don't know if I made myself clear.
I think that, can you hear me? Hello?
You're a little bit quiet, but I can hear you, but it is a little bit quiet, Ulysses.
Okay. I think the reconciliation point is a central issue, because probably we may find ourselves free to develop assistance. If we have, I suppose that if I have a low level of reconciliation, I may feel myself like in a prison. So, and the results and all my efforts should decrease. In terms of a global scenario and also to promote ideas, of course, I think that Professor Waldo proposed that we may find a way to be fully engaged in assistance, and to work in such level, we may not forget parapsychism, and it's not easy. So my challenge, I think that to work with Conscientiology is to be fully engaged and not forgetting any point. And it's really a big challenge. And it means coherence, to be coherent. And I think it's very hard to promote ideas only as a speaker, only talking about ideas. So right now, I saw that Darja, she wrote about the self-example in our chat. She wrote about it right now. And I think that we have a challenge to find a way to put all things together. Our profession, our science, conscientiology. So I'm trying to find my way of life where I can put all the things together. I try to say that as I try to be fully engaged in my self-evolution. And I don't think it's possible to do that if I don't reconciliate with myself, with groups. And I would like to return now to Tony, the first question, how to apply conscientiological techniques with groups. So I see that this kind of question is a good example how to put all things together, you see. So our challenge is not only an intellectual challenge, a theoretical challenge, it's to find a way of life. I heard right now what Juliana said, and I asked myself if I'm not able to be fully engaged, maybe there is some point to be reconciliated. Something is lacking, you see. I believe, I really think, it's my hypothesis, that if I am able to reconciliate myself, maybe the personal example may find some results in high level. I don't know if I was clear, and I'm trying to find ways to talk with people, but engage it with my daily work and putting my self-example present with my parapsychism, with people with whom I can talk freely about my parapsychism. So the question that Roberto said too about how to deal with global challenges, I think that we may present ourselves in an authentic way. It's very important for me to talk about parapsychism, even when I talk about my professional life, you see. So I think that that's a way to put all the things together.
I think I agree with Juliana and you. This is, I think, the most important thing that we can do in this life is to, at least it was what I am trying to do with me, with myself, exactly to consolidate this kind of new knowledge with myself, doing also this self-reconciliation. It means trying to know myself better and to work with the things that I need to work, that are my weak traits and the traits that I don't have now. And this I think with I can do this, I can try to do the better that I can to the others too. And I think this life, it's very important to consolidate for me, to consolidate these ideas, because we have an opportunity to have how I say, conviver, to live with some different ways and behaviors, contexts, cultures that maybe we don't have when we are in extra physical dimension. Huh? So there, it's not so easy to consolidate this new knowledge, because we are maybe in a group where if you not consolidate our new thoughts now maybe we are going again to the extra-physical dimension that we had we lived in the past lives. So I think for me it's very important to consolidate this new knowledge now, and to reconciliate with myself, because I think if I can't reconciliate with myself, it's not easy to reconciliate with others. This is my opinion.
I don't know if I understood the discussion, but it seems to me in some point that would be a division about to consolidate the idea of conscientiology and to spread or use conscientiology and interact with the whole world. I don't know if it's my understanding that I didn't understand that, because in my experience I have the to consolidate conscientiology, I think, is inside of us. We change, we recycle, and we consolidate all the new experience, multidimensional experience that we have, and we grow with that. In the same time, we live and we are doing conscientiology when we are related with people and try to bring those ideas to the world, you know, and it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge to do that, to bring new ideas, because there is people that cannot understand, others will understand, others are intermissivist, others is more than intermissivist. No, it's so evolved that doesn't need the conscientiology anymore. And so I see the challenge is in ourselves, how we related with conscientiology, and how how do you call this, my professional, not professional, my ability to bring conscientiology in the world, you know, speak, and because it's like the example that Daria was saying, when you are an example, so you live conscientiology and you bring that to your life.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's natural if you're a substantial person, as soon as you get something that is good, you want to give away, to share with people. I was just, my point of view is just that sometimes I see two different things on consciential therapy. But first of all, is the person that is good in theory and wants to give speech and things like that, and doesn't really apply these principles. That's a bad thing. It's something that I study. It's a kind of conflict of paradigm way. And the second thing, but I don't think that's the main problem. The second thing that I see is that people sometimes are upset about sharing conscientiology because it's so great for them and they don't really get why it's not more shared or well accepted, I can say, maybe. Why there is no more people that can understand or even apply the knowledge. And at that second point I was talking about before, that I think that you should try to share. It's as you said, it's important. But what I was trying to say is that don't have expectations in that sense, and don't something else that I see that people do that I think it's wrong approach is that it's not because you couldn't really you just reached a little number of persons in this dimension that it was not successful or something like that. I see a lot of people that are really like worried about that and seeing that their efforts are like a failure because they have they have no audience watching something or doing a course. And so it was more like that sense. And also I really think that our main effort should be trying to apply on us. That's something that so then you can have experience to share also. But I agree with Magali.
Yeah, I was just going to add briefly to what you're saying. I think it's interesting. I think we're all, and we always talk about experimentation and experiments, but this whole idea about a group of people, you know, coming to this dimension and trying to do things, it's another layer of experiment. You know, it's, you know, probably, well, it is like the first time for a lot of us to come like with all this information and ready to do things, and you know, how well is the experiment going, and we're still figuring it out. Like I think a lot of the conditions of the original experiment have probably changed, you know, and so how are we adapting to that and learning what the best orientation is for us, you know, individually and with others. You know, I don't think there's any clear answer, but I think it's also a healthy process for our own development of wisdom and judgment to be going through this process of having to try to figure it out, you know, on the fly, right? So, yeah, I really, you know, like your points, Juliana.
Yeah, I think that this moment in our planet, we have a lot of problems, global challenges, that is climate change, the environmental crisis, and we are with the conscientiology as a science of evolution of consciousness. We have a perspective. We are talking about the reurbanization of this planet. We are discussing advanced ideas about what is in the behind the scenes of what is happening inside of this dimension. And I think this knowledge in some way is important to this moment. I think what I'm saying that we need to, of course, be coherent, as Ulysses and Juliana are saying. This is our job as individual, is to be coherent with our paradigm, with our level of evolution and our cosmoethics. But I think what is happening now is we are how can I say, we are in a moment where the global issue is bringing to us the necessity to change our way of our mindset, our way of see the world. And this is, I think, is something that is the job of some of us to promote this idea in different contexts. I think is what I mean with this idea is that we have something to do with this moment.
I agree, Roberto. I don't think the idea is to just have anybody go and speak in these global forums when they don't have any knowledge beyond the theoretical, or they don't even know how to reconcile themselves. I don't think that's the idea at all. But I think it's like Roberto said, and Juliana even said that it's going in phases, right? And each of us also have our own path that we're on and our own strong traits and weak traits. So it is as much an individual thing as it is a collective thing, right? So I think all of those things we have to take into consideration. And I'm just mindful of the time. So Dave, did you want to wrap things up?
Yeah, so I just was saying lots of really interesting things. Yeah, I was just saying we've just opened up so many things that we could talk for hours about, probably. You know, but yet we must, respect all the, we all have schedules and things we need to get on with. Some need to go to bed, etc. But no, I think that was a really productive and really interesting, discussion. So it's really great that everyone could participate. Just would like to ask, does anyone have any feedback or any suggestions about how we could maybe do the sessions differently or better? Because again, there's like, I think 8 or 10 sessions to go still, so it'd be great if we can improve, if there's things people can think of. If anyone does have anything, don't hesitate to reach out, especially to Magali, Mashiko, Fernandez, and Jeff, who are running things. So yeah, don't hesitate. But yeah, really enjoyed everyone's ideas and contributions. So thanks so much for joining the call. Magali, Mashiko, Jeff, Fernandez, any of you want to say anything to wrap up?
No, just thank you everybody for the great discussion. Thank you very much for participating. And as Dave said, if you have any suggestions or feedback, please post it on the forum or on the website. We welcome all of your ideas.
Yes, thank you everyone. It's good to see you. And so we have next meeting in the next month, but don't forget, we have the forum. So post your, that discussion didn't end here, so we continue. We have the forum there that is discussion these 4 chapters, and we also are opening the new discussions about the next chapter, the next sections. So see you soon.